Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome a former colleague of mine, a long time ago, I might add, but a former colleague of mine and distinguished figure within the industry here in Melbourne. Geordie Brown is a PR practitioner with a decade of experience, and fantastic to have her with me today. Jord, thanks so much for jumping on.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, that's my version of your background. But can you just elaborate on that and just talk us through, all of those achievements and all of those milestones that you've achieved throughout your career? This is your time to talk about you. Can you tell us a little bit more
Yeah,
about you?
sure. A bit of imposter syndrome. So where do I start?
Start at nine. Start at nine.
Yes. So over 10 years ago now, I did start at Channel 9. I actually started handing out rulers and hats out the back of a Today Show Jeep as a promo girl at Channel 9. Um, just working casually there. And once that was within the marketing and publicity department, once I kind of found my feet there. A role was created as a marketing coordinator. And I was in marketing and publicity for about 4 years, looking after community events, helping with PR from the Logies to, White Horse, Carols by Candlelight. I was across many events and many shows. I then became the kind of guru in social media in the Melbourne Channel 9 office. So, was the go-to for social media. Stuck around footy show nights and would look after their social media. Became such a pest that they then created a role for me in there. So I was footy show social media producer for 2 years, and did help, I guess, in-house publicity there, helping write the media releases, sending out assets to media, while I was sitting within the footy show office. That was also kind of grew into a wide world of sports social media producer. So I was working on the cricket over summer, and then footy during winter. It was two very, very fun years of my job to be, sitting out on the MCG tweeting the cricket out in the sun. I called
Mm.
that a job for a couple of years. And then I'd been at 9 for 6 years and kind of realized, okay, I've been here a quarter of my life. I need to spread my wings. There was a role that came up in netball as a digital comms and communications coordinator. Sorry, I know I'm rambling, but there is, it is part of my journey. And yeah, so I applied for that, which was a bit of a social media and a media role, which was perfect, a good step outside of my comfort zone of Channel 9, and into a bit of a different industry, but not too, it was still familiar for me. So that was at Netball Australia. Within there, kind of, latched onto the media manager there and learnt what I could off her, developed some skills, and then a media and comms manager role at Netball Vic, and the Vixens came up, and it was just it was a very easy transition, you could say. It was a step up, but I'd kind of throughout my time at 9, and then at Netball Australia, I kind of built up my toolkit, and loved that job. I was there for 4 or 5 years, and then moved into agency world about 8 months ago. And yeah, it's a different kettle of fish. Let's say
Mm.
being on the other side is quite different, but it all, like I said, it's that toolkit and just building up all the skills, and now I'm able to use it, yeah, agency side, and loving it.
Yeah, we talk about that distinction in class a bit. So you've worked on the client side, sort of as in-house PR and comms, and building out opportunities from in-house, and now you're sort of taking briefs and working with clients, and that's kind of the world that we've been speaking about and learning about over the last few months in this class. But I just want to go back to your first role there, and a point that you make. You know, that idea that someone created a job based off your skill set, your unique skill set. Now, you know, that kind of, to me, is really indicative of the job market and of the market that our students are going into now. You know, you and I talked off camera before about that word hustle. Tell us a little bit about, you know, that as an experience, and, you know, how you just get your foot in the door, and how you taught yourself and you know, commenced your journey in that way.
Yeah, well, I'm just a kind of a big believer in just doing, going above and beyond and not expecting much in return, particularly money. But yeah, you kind of want to show people, yeah, all your skills. You will kind of hone down eventually, like you'll refine that into a job that you really love eventually. But to get your foot in the door, it is showing those people and the higher ups that what you can do, and that you've got initiative and you're willing to work hard.
Mm.
Yeah, and hustle is a great word for it. Um,
And
yeah, you just
initiative,
kind of
that word
throw
that you
yourself
use
at
as
it
well.
all. Pardon?
Yeah, yeah. That initiative, that word that you use as well, is a great word. I think initiative and hustle and throwing yourself as you at it, as you say, you know, the qualities that people look for, and from there you sort of build your skill set out.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think it's yeah, try new things because you just never know what. I guess PR and comms is so broad that you can fit in and it all kind of overlaps, and it's kind of, it all comes down to kind of key messaging. And so how are you doing that? Is it using social media? Is it, reaching out to journalists? Is it doing event listings or things like that? Just yeah, you kind of, yeah, you can work that out. You just use it all.
It's a great segue, because we often talk about, you know, what's in the toolkit for PR practitioners. You mentioned a few there: the social media, your media relations, events and activations, and those type of things. And the students have just answered an essay on the topic of what is PR. So, Jord, after a decade in the field, how do you find it easy to define what PR is when people ask you what you do, or how do you go about talking about what is PR?
Um, Honestly, couldn't tell you. You're right. It is. Um, it depends on my audience, I guess. Like, telling Nana that opening up the paper and showing her a photo that I'd set up, I'm like, that's my job. That's what I do. Um, I what is PR? It has also it's changed in the 10 years that I've been around. Um, well, you just, yeah, it's kind of, well, it's grown so much. So 10 years ago, there weren't podcasts. So now you're kind of trying to work out, how can I fit the talent that I've got, whether it's an athlete or a celebrity or a CEO of a company, how am I going to make their story interesting enough that a podcast host is going to want to talk to them for 45 minutes? And you just never had to think about that 10 years ago. It was, okay, how can they pump up the show that we're promoting in a 10-minute chat with a journalist? So yeah, it has completely changed. For me, PR, and what I love about it is the relationships, building relationships. It's dealing with journalists and, making them you're going to have to rely on them. So it's creating those relationships and not choosing when to actually pitch to them. But then also relationships with your talent, making sure they trust you to tell tell their story, give out the right messaging. So managing relationships is probably one of my, that's probably how I would. What is PR? It's a good question, and it could change day to day. I guess for me, being the middle woman between the outside world and a company, a client, and so getting the message from that company/client out to the wider world. And how do I do it? And what's the right messaging? That's where I come in.
I think that's a great answer. I think the message there, as you say, is that you're the intermediary between the company and the outside world, or the organization, the outside world, and how you push the message out there is going to vary day to day, which I think makes a lot of sense. And as you say, with the changes to the media landscape, there's just so many more ways that you can do that. And brands and organizations talk directly to their customers and create their own content now, and PR people are meant to oversee that. And so you become the quasi producer, as you mentioned there. And other times you're sort of working to help to help supply talent or assets or messaging for for networks or channels to produce the content. So it varies greatly. And I think that's a great answer that you gave. So
Thanks.
I'm keen
Distinction.
I'm keen to talk to you about your experience in proactive PR versus kind of reactive PR, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, at the Vixens, you did a fair bit of media management, which is probably more of the reactive stuff that we're not focusing on in this class as much, but now you're probably working more on the proactive side. What are some of the pros and cons of each of those, and which one do you enjoy?
I've now worked out that I like sport. So I'm sport PR. I've tried lifestyle, and it's just not for me. So sport is, that's my bread and butter. And if I'm breaking that down, it is a mixture of proactive and reactive. So yeah, naturally sport is reactive. You win, you lose, and that's kind of what sets up the next few days of stories. Having said that, there is proactive media in, uniform announcements, or a new player signing, or things like that, where you do have the luxury, I guess, of being able to look ahead and go, okay, what's the best way? How are we going to tick the KPIs off? So, for example, a uniform announcement, there's obviously a brand involved in that. So with the Vixens, it was a Puma dress. So just making sure that we're hitting their key targets, and just giving them exposure, showing those results to then get them to sign on the next year. I like proactive because you thank yourself at the time. You look back and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I was able to, just sit down and think, who's going to react to this better? Or, you've got an athlete from Traralgon, and so you just sit down and map out all the Traralgon kind of media outlets, and the planning is great. It is a luxury, but then I do love the fast pace of reactive. And okay, if for example, with the Vixens, if they're losing a few games, how are we selling tickets to the next round? And that was my job to kind of frame the messaging, stick with us, or, those kind of things that, and then use that for the next few days to get the results of the ticket sales. Yeah. So I like both. proactive and reactive. I know that's a bit silly, but yeah, I do.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, and particularly as you say, sport has so much of that. You know, the cut and thrust of the day to day. Suddenly, you know, someone does something wrong at a sports club, and you know, they're front page of the Herald Sun, and
Hmm.
you know, everyone's interested. We talk about, you know, if it bleeds, it leads, and you know, the journos in Melbourne don't miss a good sports saga story. So I think you know, being on the defense on those things can be very exhilarating, but at the same time, as you say, some of the proactive stuff is pretty cool as well.
Mm.
With the proactive side, I always say to our students, at the core of it is, um, you know, to be brutal, putting your balls on the line, and coming out with an idea. Now, how hard is it to make that transition to, I need to actually just put my ideas out there, regardless of the fact that they're not going to be perfect straight up? I think when you're young, you sort of sit in the background. Oh, I've got an idea. I might not. I might hold it off because it might be a bit stupid, or it might sound a bit silly. Like, how hard is it to kind of start to push ideas out there and come up with random things, and you know, talk up in boardrooms or in executive rooms, and you know, did you find that to be challenging throughout your career progression?
Yeah, for sure. And now I look back at it and I'm I don't know why. Because it's now I realize so many ideas that are put out on the table, they're either built on or you come back to, you kind of, yeah, you come back to it for another client or for another time in the campaign. So, um, it's
You're not meant to say that out loud, George. You're not recycling ideas for clients.
yeah, I know. But yeah, so it is hard to tell. Like, even if someone told me now, well, back then, get your ideas out. It it takes, like, there's nothing wrong with sitting there quiet, because it does, like, you shouldn't have to, but it does take a lot of meetings or a lot of years of experience to actually get that confidence. So there's nothing wrong with it, with, being so. I know that's not what you're supposed to say, but I completely understand that it's hard to speak up. But like, there is no such thing as a silly idea. Um, like, if it is a bit silly, you build on it, or
Mm,
at least your manager or the people in the room know where your head's at, and then can actually, as funny as it sounds, use that, like, notice, realize that that's a strength for you, and use that somewhere else. Like, they're smart enough to know, yeah,
mm,
how to deal with what you've put on the table, whether it is, okay, let's build on this, or okay, hang on, let's use that person for something
mm.
down the track that may not make sense. For a communications person, I really struggle to communicate sometimes.
No, no, I think we all know exactly what you mean. There's, you know, maybe your whole idea is not going to be adopted, but parts
Mm,
of it, you know, are going to form the basis of the big idea, which I think is a really important aspect. You gave the example of a Traralgon player, and I think, you know, that in itself is, you know, is something that, you know, perhaps is a really easy starting point. Where is your ambassador from? Like,
mm,
where are they born, or where did they grow up? What's the town? Because you know, I said at the core of it is ideas, but perhaps, you know, the other thing that's really central to all of this is telling a good story. And I think, you know, maybe something that I wouldn't mind asking you about is, you know, for an effective or, you know, for the campaigns that you've had that have been successful and effective, you know, what do you think are some of the key elements that have made them effective?
um, so for me, a big one is um, clear messaging. So you could have so many people wanting to get their message in this one media op, or
Mm,
one event, or whatever it is. But I just think having clear and concise messaging. is key. You can have tiered messaging, and we, for 100 days to go, so I'm working with Com Games Australia at the moment, and for 100 days to go, we were announcing the weightlifting team. There were some amazing stories within weightlifting, which I never knew until we were supposed to announce this team. But to get media's interest, we actually had to announce them on 100 days to go, because media seem to like that, the countdown, 100 days to go, 50 days to go till Com Games or Olympics. So our messaging, the top tier was actually 100 days to go. Oh, by the way, we're announcing the weightlifting team. So it was, we were trying to do a few things, but the clear messaging, we kind of tiered it that way. And it was so much more effective than if we did a media call with just the weightlifting team announced, which all due respect to them, because the weightlifters I dealt with, they've got such great stories, and so sometimes, but it's hard to articulate that to media when you're trying to get like a Nine News down. They don't know these weightlifters, so okay, let's polish it with 100 days to go. We had these glittery 100s because they all want vision, like pretty vision, color pictures, and yeah, it actually turned out to be quite successful. So for me, it's, that clear messaging. I would also say managing relationships, whether it is, the client, or the journalist or the talent, managing expectations, and also kind of leaning on your relationships, particularly with journos. You've got to kind of be quite friendly with them um, to get some things across the line, but also know when it's not. They get sick of you if you're trying to pitch every single day with things that just don't work with their publication. So, that. I also think just with the agency and client, it's making sure that people are across their roles. So I know it's not really the execution of the campaign, but defining, for example, like some clients might want us to just do the doing, or they might want a certain number of hits. And so just working out from the get-go, hang on, why have you hired me as the agency? Like, what do you need me to do? And then again, it's just that managing expectations, and a report that you do for one client could be completely different to what you do for the other based on what they need you to do.
Yeah, definitely. We talk about that a lot in the subject, that, perhaps, and to use maybe an example from your Vixens days, as you mentioned, perhaps the sole objective of the campaign is to boost, the crowd by 1,000 people. So it's a really targeted niche campaign. It might be, a paid social thing, really targeting a really strong demo. We want, girls 14 to 25 or something like that. Whereas other clients, they might just want to brand build and get their brand out there with a big brand awareness campaign, and send out a media release to, everything from, Bert's backyard all the way through to wide world of sports or whatever. We just want whatever we can find. So we certainly talk about that. And I think agency, forces you to really problem solve on behalf of the client.
Yeah.
I really want to drill down on that a little bit, because I say this to the class fit as well, that if the client could do it themselves, they wouldn't be coming to the agency. So the problems are going to be inherently hard. And as you say, you sort of, particularly in the media management space, you feel like you might be bordering on, hey, journalist X, I know I came to see you last week with this story, but I really need this one. Like, how do you find that balance of, trying to manage strong relationships with media versus strong relationships with clients who you're ultimately accountable to on, a certain media value?
Good question. I think it particular with the client, it is setting expectations. Um, so it is. I am very lucky. My boss now has been around for 100 years, and so straight away she knows exactly we're not going to get that on the project, or we're not. She's very good at managing those expectations because she knows it so well. I'm still learning, and I'm 10 years in, but you do have a gut feel of, for example, the weightlifting announcement. It was, going to the client saying, okay, the weightlifting by itself probably isn't going to get much traction. So let's add that layer of 100 days to go. We're now announcing, we have to announce 21 teams, and every single announcement is completely different based on our advice to them. The minor sports, we want to promote them because this is their time to shine, but we do have to be realistic with, okay, it might just be a press release and local media, not a Herald Sun. So yeah, for the client, it is managing expectations. They do sometimes think that you're just a magician and you can sell a glass, like, or a pen. And it's not that easy. Yeah, so it's managing expectations for clients. With journos, they get so many pictures a day. And sometimes you have to say to them, like, I know this is a stretch, but, and that for me, that comes quite easily. Well, sometimes I'm just like, no, there's no way I'm even gonna bother asking this person that I know. But sometimes it's like, hey, what are your thoughts? And most of the time they actually say, not for us, but so if I'm speaking to a news sports journo, not for us, but try the news. I'll pass it on to the news department within news, because they might like it. So, half the time, most of the time, they're actually giving you feedback and advice on where to take it next. So, yeah, it's always worth just sussing it out. I just want to get your thoughts on this. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like, it is, you you are going to get rejected so many times. Like, I get rejected every day, multiple times with pictures, and you just got to know that that comes with it. And if you're calling your best friend who's a journalist at the Herald Sun, and oh, any chance, most of, like, they're going to say no if it's not right for them. And at least then you can take that feedback back to the client and say, oh, look, Herald Sun wasn't interested because the election's on, or they needed a fresh photo, or things like that. So if they're not interested, they're not interested, and you can tell the client that so they know that for next time.
What about that? You sort of say, you touched on a really interesting point there, the idea that, they give you some feedback and they might go away and say, hey, this would be a great story, but there's no pictures. Have you thought about having an event, or, have you thought about activating in this way that would make the story more attractive? Like, have you, off the top of your head, and I'll give you a moment to think about this, have you had a situation where you've workshopped an idea, off the back of feedback, to get it to a point that you've run it in broadcast, and then I suppose concurrently, I wanted to talk about events and activations. What do you reckon what's the most interesting PR event that you've ever worked on in terms of your background?
So, working off the feedback, so they're not really specific in like, hold an event and we'll cover it. They'll do, oh, can okay, there's that athlete. Can you get their nana? Or do you have access to, a doctor in ankle surgery or something that would help us do this story on your athlete that's hurt her ankle. And so then you go and you can go and work, make help. Well, that's part of your job, is to create the package and story for the journalist. You do just as much of the work as the journalist it does. Yeah. They're writing the script, but it's based on the media release or the information you've given them. They're speaking with talent based on people that you have provided. So, and you've set up the interviews and you've made sure they've allowed an hour in their day to get 20 minutes of interview, and then the rest of overlay of them playing in the park, walking their dog, or whatever it is. So yeah, but also you kind of get into, what makes a story good, based on like you've got to live and breathe the news. So, you're watching the news at night and you can kind of then work out what goes to air. Sometimes if someone's like, oh, sell this glass, you want to find research or something like that, like, build on, okay, we've got to get this glass on the news, but what else can we do with it? Okay, let's bring in a researcher, some research, some stats on glassware. I'm taking this west. I don't know where I'm taking this, but
we only just talked about research and commissioning research last week. The idea of how do you make something newsworthy? You can make it newsworthy through fresh research or fresh data. So
and
the glasses is a great example in that sense.
Oh, there you go. I was working on a dog food company recently when I was doing lifestyle. And so it was Providore for dogs. And it was, just kind of every week we were trying to find new ways to get this out there. And it was research and, how many, what percentage of people have bought dogs since lockdown, and for Valentine's Day or something, like how many people say their dog is the love of their life, like that kind of research, which sounds so weird, but like that's what gets it up.
And going back to that idea of there is no such thing as a stupid idea.
Exactly.
When you got to try and sell dog food, and you've got to try and put that through the news, there is literally no such thing as a bad idea.
Yeah, correct, exactly.
Tell us about sport in particular, competitive landscape. You've worked at at a couple of, like you mentioned the weightlifters and the Commonwealth Games teams who are struggling for airtime. And I mean the Commonwealth Games has its challenges. Off the top of my head, if I'm I'll play the news outlet role, you play the PR person, but poor time zone. It's in the middle of winter. People are sort of hibernating at that time of the year, blah blah blah, like, and then fringe sports, and then the fact that it's Commonwealth Games, not Olympics, like we're not as interested, all of that kind of thing kind of plays against it. You mentioned the idea of repackaging and tiering your messaging, which I think is really clever, but what are some of the other ways that you've fought for airtime, and maybe going back to your Vixens stuff, because we've had a couple of Com Games examples. What are some of the ways that you've fought to get Vixen's narrative into the mainstream news when it's up against the AFL in particular here in Melbourne?
So I got myself on the AFL media list, distribution list. So I was able to, so I got every media release that came through, every media alert from every single club. And so if I needed to make an announcement, I wasn't making it at the same time as a Geelong press conference or any other team press conference for that matter. So that was one thing, just avoiding them
Yeah.
at all costs. And you know, like you wouldn't do things, well, not that you would, but like Anzac Day, that's either side of Anzac Day, completely like don't even. I mean, you can bother, go for it, but I steer clear of those because that's just Collingwood and Richmond, Collingwood and Essendon on every page. And that well, then now they've got Anzac Day Eve game as well. It's for a week. It's just fully AFL.
Mm.
And yeah, so avoiding that, but also leveraging off it. So a few of the Vixens, uh, one of a good friend of mine actually, her brother played for Bulldogs, and we were having our best and fairest night. So I used her because he'd just taken his mum to the Brownlow, or it was announced that he was taking his mum to the Brownlow. And so I'd snuck her into the narrative as well, but to promote our best and fairest that was being live streamed. So it's not, I shouldn't say that I was using her for that, but yeah, leveraging off it as well, finding those little tidbits that all journalists I find want to talk about AFL. So if there's even the slight, one of them was dating one of the footy players. So you know, oh, she's going to be at that game, or like she'll be at the Freeze MND game or something. Like getting them in that way.
Mm.
So leveraging off that.
Yeah.
Um, what other? Um, for Vixens, I did a lot of, I guess, exclusives. Giving it to if you're giving it to journos as like you've got first bite at this, how do you want the photo? Who do you want to speak to? That helps as well because then they can push it up to the editor. We're the first ones speaking to these people, like yeah. So that yeah, again, it's that managing relationships and giving to get a little.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think a couple of points that you touched on there that are really interesting. You sort of mentioned the tidbits and the little the little did you know, and oh, by the way, that person's with that person, and by the way, our game's on that night, so come to the game. Make sure you give the plug. But it is, as you've kind of alluded to, it is all about knowing the publication's audience, what they're interested in, and what the publication's going to ultimately deliver, and then working your way into the narrative. So if the narrative is going to be about Freeze MND, and it is in a couple of weeks' time when it's Queen's birthday, blah blah blah. Like we already know that the Herald Sun's going to cover that. There's no point trying to put an announcement out about you know ovarian cancer that week because
Mm.
it's not your week to do that. But
Yeah.
what you can do is talk about how your players are supporting that and work for incremental gain. And I think that that's really important to do because if you think you're going to if you think that and I know that our students are working on some interesting sports campaigns at the moment as part of their assessment for if you think that frisbee is going to get a go ahead of Freeze MND, or if you think that dodgeball is going to get a go, it's just simply not going to happen, is it? So it doesn't even matter, outside of getting some sort of global ambassador, global talent ambassador.
Yeah.
Even then, like it might not shake the AFL and the Herald Sun as an example. So trying to find ways to incrementally add value to a broader narrative is a really interesting concept.
Mm.
And then I think, as you also said, just again, managing those relationships, by the way, hey, so-and-so, just wanted to let you know that this is happening. It doesn't have to be as formal as right, we're going to build the media release. We're going to send out the media release. We're going to send out the media alert. Like when you get on the ground, yes, as part of a big campaign, that's what you do. But there's a less glamorous side to it where it's, sending texts, it's, just it's being proactive, sending a couple of emails, taking the time to ask someone how they're going and, oh, by the way, this kind of thing. And I think that's a really important part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did just think like sorry, back a few steps, just with the AFL stuff and leveraging off that. If the Vixens were playing in Ballarat the same weekend that the Bulldogs were, so I'd set up a photo with the Bulldogs to run in the paper. Sport goes regional, great, and also a lot of the time the AFL. So AFL media managers, they're getting rid of people sniffing through their bins. Like they're actually telling people
Mm.
stop knocking on my door. Whereas with netball, I was like jumping up and down, like come knock on my door. And so those, setting up a photo with a Bulldogs player and a Vixen, they were happy for me to. They were like, "Yep, great, we'll tick that coverage off." But yeah, can you manage? Great, excellent. Checking the fixture to see when AFL teams were playing interstate and the Vixens were playing interstate. Media is always at the airport for AFL teams. So I would reach out to them and say, hey, are you going to be at the airport? Because usually all teams leave around the same time, like mid morning. So, hey, are you going to be at the airport? I've got Joe Weston, she's playing 50 games. Can you just have a chat to her? Well, yeah, sure, because we're there anyway. Great. And that was on the news that night. So, yeah, you got to be a bit sneaky sometimes, but it pays off.
It's a really good point. Like the resources in a newsroom are very finite. There's 5 cameras. That's it.
Yeah.
There's no more. There's 3 journos covering it today or whatever. It's quite finite. So being able to be resourceful is really important. And I think, yeah, the point that you've made a couple of times now, that idea is that you're actually building the story for the journo or for the outlet. So you've got to be able to build it like a journalist would or like a
Yeah.
news organization would. So think that's I think that's a really important point and a prudent point. But I think I just want to, before we wrap up, touch on, the advice that you've been given over your career that I think you've really taken on board and how that's helped you and what advice you'd give our students, watching this today.
Hmm. I think it goes back to that kind of hustle to get your foot in the door. It's just kind of doing anything and everything. Kind of building the kind of being a journalist without being a journalist. Like I'm also a videographer. I can cut videos. I'm a graphic designer. Not like I'm not actually, but I can do it very, very basic. Um, so just kind of making sure that you can do little skills and yeah, that would be kind of key. Now I'm in a really small agency where we have to do absolutely everything. My boss is the finance and it's yeah, that stuff is just not me. I'm head of IT. Um, I've named myself. But like I'm doing the social media or I'm cutting up packages or I'm, you know, troubleshooting the software we use for a guest list for a premiere screening we're doing next week. Being able to kind of tap into just build your skills in kind of anything and everything. I would also say just like give everything a go. That yeah, don't be afraid to speak up, even though we know that it's okay not to, but like don't be afraid to, because you get to my age now and I'm like, oh, why? Like I actually have good ideas and I've always had good ideas. Why wasn't I telling people about this?
Mm.
What else? Um, yeah, I think just don't put so much pressure on, I want to do sport PR or like try things, and I'm still narrowing down what exactly I want to do. And the jobs, I guess, get narrower as you kind of get up there. So, narrower, more narrow.
Mm.
Um, yes, and I'm still learning that, and you will until you retire. Well, I believe in like once you stop learning on the job, like what's the point of being there? Um yeah, so
Yeah.
learn, ask questions, go for coffee with people. That sounds so silly, but go for coffee. People are very happy to take an hour out of their day to sit with someone for coffee and just get them like pick someone's brain. Ask like how their story, how they got to where they are. I did have coffee with someone who wanted to pick my brain once, and I ordered a coffee and they didn't order anything. So order something, even if you don't like coffee, get an orange juice or something because it's a bit awkward. Um, but yeah, go out, like reach out to people. You get rejected so many times in PR, so you might get rejected for coffee as well, but still just, find out a media manager or a social media coordinator or a PR coordinator and just have coffee with them, pick their brain. And, a lot of the time they've got a job a few months down the track and they'll think of you,
Mm.
as long as you order something.
It is actually sometimes that simple, isn't it? Oh,
Yeah.
we need some help, and I just know that person is
Yeah.
reliable because they showed up for coffee. And as bad as that sounds,
Yeah.
as much as we all talk about, removing cognitive bias from the hiring process, etc. Like sometimes it's literally that shit. We need someone now. Oh, old mate came and had coffee with me. They were pretty good. We'll get them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So be front of mind, I reckon, is a great.
Yeah.
That's a great message. And I think, Jord, in terms of today, we've pretty much narrowed down on what sports PR is and what it looks like currently and the opportunities that exist. But just to close out, the last one from me is, what do you think the future looks like for sports PR? Off camera, we kind of talked about the idea that Nine and the Herald Sun, and those domains are becoming quite tribal. You've got Nine with all of its media assets now, the Age, Sydney Morning Herald, Financial Review, etc., are in direct competition with News Corp, and they've all got their associated sports. So got Herald Sun has got AFL and netball and all the Fox sports, and then the Ages or Nine's got NRL and tennis and some of those sports. And as a PR practitioner, you already know, like, I can't pitch that story to them. They're not rights holders, etc. But what do you think the future is going to look like for PR? And what do you think? You kind of touched on some of the skills that PR practitioners are going to need. You need a broad skill set, a really rounded skill set. But what do you think is going to become more prevalent for PR practitioners moving forward?
I think it's just going to build on that. You're an in-house journo, and yeah, supplying all the images, supplying all the vision, just to make sure, yeah, doing the work for them, handing it over,
Mm.
and just hoping that it fits in with their bulletin or whatever it is, or their, in the paper. It's who knows? But everything, it's going to evolve. However that does, I'm not sure. I just know, yeah, I think for me, it's going to be just making sure there are assets available for anyone and everyone. With the Herald Sun, the Age, and broadcast rights and things like that, you kind of pray that when you're pitching to a journo that they forget that the sport's not that, if you're pitching to the Age, you're like, okay, please forget that netball's on Foxtel. Just please, just for 1 minute. And yeah, but also with that, those guys are all about clicks and subscriptions. So I've seen so many netball um, people in the netball community refusing to click on links like Murdoch Media links. But it's like, well, you're not necessarily helping him. You're helping that journalist and you're helping the sport because the editor's seeing that X amount of people are reading that or clicking or subscribing to that. So I've gone off on a tangent.
We're getting into the political sphere now.
Yes, I didn't mean to. It's just something that I saw, and I'm like, oh, please just click the link. Like, oh, the more appetite there is, the more coverage there is for the minor sports, and I think, yeah, that's just my little netball thing. But yeah,
No, makes a lot of sense, and I think as you say, like, possibly like the middle entity being the news organization could eventually be removed altogether if people, if organizations start to build out their content teams and content becomes just an aggregation model. Well, maybe news outlets lose their audience to direct channels, which could be a
yeah.
really interesting phenomenon. And and then I think we'd see some sports rise to prevalence that we haven't seen before, which could be really awesome and could be very interesting.
So you're smarter than me, so you answer
Not true.
that.
Not true. I just elaborate on the answers that you gave, Jord. Hey, thanks so much for all your time today. It's been fantastic talking to you. All the best for the Com Games coming up, and all the best for everything that's ahead with all your clients. And I really appreciate your time chatting today.
Thank you.